Reclaim the Agenda is a collective of women's sector representatives, feminist, trade union and student activists who campaign around 6 main themes: an end to poverty, an end to discrimination, an end to domestic and sexual violence, to have healthcare and childcare services that meet our needs, and to live in a society where we are valued as equal decision makers.
Today is very much a celebration and opportunity to say thank you to everyone who's been involved in the last 20 years. Thank you to all the staff. To our volunteers, thank you so much. I'd like to thank Deirdre, who was such a fundamental part of the growth and development of the helpline service. I too was a volunteer. I started in 1997. I walked into University Street and Deirdre was there, and there happened to be some training starting the next week, and that began my journey, and I'm still here. So I'm very proud to be and very privileged to be able to make a small impact or a change in some people's lives. It's a very privileged position to be in.
So I was the first ever regional helpline coordinator. I was new to Northern Ireland. I'd moved over not 6 months before. I was newly married and I had a new job. I learned what rights were. Rights aren't about putting somebody down. Feminism isn't about hating men, which was quite useful because I was only just married. That it's about ensuring that people who have been subjected to the power of others, and in our case men, that is equalised. And the voices of those women still stay with me today. And there's not an 8th of March that has gone by since that time that I haven't thought about that helpline. The only reason we were able to go from nothing at 5 o'clock on the 8th of March 1995 to 24/7 at 6 o'clock was because of the magnificence that was and is Women's Aid. We know, you know better than me, but we know that domestic abuse and domestic violence is no respecter of class or age or race or anything like that. It happens everywhere, and it happens in all homes. And the helpline was able to reach into those homes and get those calls. I was very young and I was very naive, but you helped me ground myself in rights, in human rights, and you taught me a lot about parents' rights as well, and how parents are often best placed to support their children. And that's what put me in the stead to get this job. So I just want to say, and it was easy to find these, I keep these very, very close to me. This was our first ever helpline leaflet, and this was my business card. And genuinely, it didn't take long to find them because I keep them close and I have them on a wall wherever I am. I'll never, ever forget that experience. And I know I speak on behalf, hopefully, the women who have rung that helpline over the last 20 years, that you have provided the support and lifeline that they've needed. And for that, I'm very, very proud to have had some small part in that, and I thank you all for that.
Unless you were financially independent, and that was much more rare then than it is now, or you had a family that was strong enough, able enough to protect you and help and support you, then you were stuck. So women were trapped for decades in their own homes, being subjected to violence. Family law in Northern Ireland by that stage was utterly outdated. And I was convinced that if we were going to attack domestic violence, then we had to do something to improve the rights and the status of women within marriage, within the family. So if I can give just 2 examples. In those days, normally it was the husband's name on the deeds of the house. And on divorce, women could be and were evicted from the family home. Secondly, in those days, a husband could sue in a court of law anyone who sheltered his wife against his wishes. I mean, it was the Dark Ages. In all of the work that I've been doing, first of all, research. I remember when I was sitting, kicking the things around with Alex Satwood, who was then the minister, I said, look, we've got to kind of do some actual research analysis on this, and I produced a timeline, a 35-page document. I don't know if anybody read it much, but anyway, it set out, this is what happens in January 2011, this is what happens in April, this is what happens the following October, blah, blah. And I set it all out so that people could understand what was happening and what it would mean for ordinary people. So did the research, but also above and beyond that, what this whole experience has convinced me of more than ever is that in dealing with these things, a central element has to be focus on rights, focus on advice. To take one very simple example, if you look at the Welfare Reform Bill, it's not about getting people into work. That's irrelevant. Acres of the bill are taken up with sanctions, provisions whereby people can be excluded from benefit if they don't do this, if they don't do that, if they don't do the other. It's about exclusion. Welfare reform is about deterrence, deterring people from claiming benefit in the first place because they know they'll have such a horrible experience, and then putting them off benefit if they possibly can in the second. What's happening in England is that local officers, local staff are under the cosh to exclude as many people as they can from benefit, regardless of the circumstances of the claimant, regardless of the consequences for the claimant. As a result, sanctions are implicated in suicides, in deaths, and the growing reliance on food banks. And it's quite extraordinary the things that have been going on in England. I've been really, in the various things I'm doing, trying to make sure we don't have that come into Northern Ireland. But, for example, they've got dodges in the local offices to trip people up. One local office, what they decided to do was, a lot of claimants have reading problems, dyslexia and so on. So what they were doing was giving claimants complex instructions in writing and then sanctioning them, putting them off benefit when they didn't follow the instructions. It is as bad as that. But the application of a sanction can be appealed. There is a hardship fund. But of course, as usual, rights are worthless if people don't know about them. Rights are worthless if people don't have help in exercising those rights. If people don't have advice, help in exercising their rights when they're adversely affected by government decisions, then what's on paper doesn't matter at all. We have got tough times ahead. We've already come through a lot of tough times. Whatever else we do, whether it's benefits, women's aid or whatever, we have to defend the services that people turn to when they don't know what to do, they don't know what their rights are, and they don't know how to manage a situation. So advice, rights, emphasis on. So that is why I think the service we're celebrating today is so important. As I say, it doesn't matter whether it's women's aid, whether it's benefits or whatever, and children's. We focus on rights, we focus on advice. And therefore I'm delighted to be here. And we're all basically doing the same thing. Thank you all very much.
I spent a long time talking to a woman on the phone. And the one thing I remember about the call was she cried an awful lot, and it was quite emotional, I think, for me to listen to her, although I had worked with women and talked to women in refuge. But this was very different because I couldn't see the woman and see her face and see her emotions. So through her crying, I tried to talk to her and listen to her and tell her it would be okay, you know, to calm down, and as much as I could do, because, as I said, I wasn't talking face to face to the woman, so it was very different for me. Through time, I think it must have been about an hour and a half later, got the woman, talked to her. She had 3 children, and they were aged, I think, if I can remember rightly, 7, 4, and I think the youngest one was a few months old, if I'm right. Gave her all. At that time, you know, you had refuge. You didn't have all of what the women have now, which is lovely. But they had the support, and she was offered refuge. And unfortunately, the only refuge that was available for this woman was a long distance away. So we talked through all her options, what she wanted to do. And the one thing that she wanted was to make sure that her children wouldn't be taken from her, and because she was removing them from the home. And would social services be involved? And I, at that time, said no, because I didn't know anything about whether or not social services would have done anything. So I told her I would have to ring around to see where I could get her into refuge. This took a bit of time, but I did it. Got refuge at one of our refuges, but couldn't get transport. So I phoned the police, who had already been rung, and talked to a policeman and then a policewoman, because it was 3 children. And I asked, is there any way they could help to get this woman to a refuge? Because this refuge was quite a long way away from Coleraine, I have to be very honest and say the police were amazing. And they transported this woman from Coleraine to Ballymena to Antrim to Belfast in 4 different journeys. And for me, the one thing that sticks with me with that first call, and I probably still does even now, answering the phone and talking to women, is that we don't know what happened to the woman. We don't know whether that woman stayed, went, got a house, is okay. And for me, I still, all the years later, even after that phone call, I still wonder, did that woman stay or go back? And I know that sometimes we can hear whether women went into refuge or not, and that's okay. But for me, I just always hope when I end a call with a woman that I've done a good job, that I've given her all the support, even 20 years down the line, that I hope that at the end of it, there's a light at the end of the tunnel for her, and that she makes her way through life as best as she can with the tools that she's got.
Last week, a woman phoned me and she said that she had had our helpline card in her purse for 5 years. Last week was the first time that she plucked up the courage to talk to us. She was married at 19 and she's 62 now. A woman rang me maybe 3 weeks ago. Nobody knew about the domestic violence in her relationship. And she said to me, and I wrote it down because it just resonated in my head, I have all these feelings and I don't know what to do with them. I've been used, I've been bruised, I've been exploited, manipulated and imprisoned in my own home. My life has been drained out of me. I feel that I've got no choices left. She was told it was her fault. It was her problem. She was called mental on a daily basis, and I use that word with respect because her partner had called her that. It's not a word that I like to use in any public forum, but that was what she was subjected to. She had never told anybody about what was happening in her life. We talked about why she used alcohol, and she said she used it to numb the pain from what was going on in her life. We talked for 50 minutes, and I was able to give her information. I listened to her first of all, but I was also able to put her in contact with her local Women's Aid group. That woman was from London, and she's a community psychiatric nurse. We are a link to the outside world. We are a link on a journey, and that journey is a journey to freedom. And everybody joins that path at different points. Mother Teresa said, the miracle is not that we do this work, but that we are happy to do it. And I know for the folk right throughout Women's Aid and right throughout the helpline and all the people here today are happy to do it.
Thank very much all of the workers and volunteers, and I do want to particularly pay tribute to Deirdre Teague, who's here today, who was the manager through most of that period. So Kula handed on the baton, and thank you very much for that, Deirdre. So. What I love very much is going somewhere and people start telling me about the helpline, and I think, great, you know, they own it. This is for everyone, so we want it to be owned. And finally, I would just say as well that there's a great strength for us all and hope, because we're also part of a worldwide movement, which is a movement indeed for rights, for, you know, a civilized, sane world where actually people matter. And specifically from our perspective as feminists, we're part of a whole global network of women and the movement that is working to end violence against women and girls. And all instances of abuse, all the things that are now coming into Northern Ireland are becoming more apparent, like forced marriage, female genital mutilation, all of these things will be named, will be identified and will be opposed. And most critically, that support for those women and girls will absolutely be there. It's the heart of everything we do. It's at the heart of the helpline. Also want to pay tribute to Sonia McMullen, our acting helpline manager, who's taken us through a great period of change, where we now are also clearly in the forefront of the work on domestic and sexual violence, and in the forefront of the government strategy that is soon to come out on it. So thank you all very, very much, and please do stay and have some cake.